This is the second time this week I've received a comment like this, which tells me this is relevant material and I need to make a video about it. So this is a comment I received on another video I made called My Attempt to Make Peace with Spanish Men Who Watch My Videos. But Jesus Lainez, who's faithful watcher of my videos, been watching for a long time, very grateful to have him watching, had this to say, quote, "I definitely want to go to Spain one day. I mean, some of my ancestors came from there. It's a shame, Nick, that your grandma was not allowed to speak Spanish by her parents. I would have loved to hear your mom and you speak it. Of course, we are not going to retain the languages of all of our ancestors," end quote. So I'm making this video so that we can have a discussion. Was it right or wrong for my great-grandparents who were Mexican to make that decision they did? So consider this. They lived in southern Mexico, Michoacan, Mexico. They moved all the way out of Mexico into America and went all the way up to Buffalo, New York, near the Canadian border, near Niagara Falls. Okay, and that's where they established their family in America. They had their kids here, raised them here, which my grandma was one of them. And they had a rule in their house, and that is, you're not allowed to speak Spanish in this home. You can only speak English, which you will be learning at school. Okay, that's what they did. Now, it worked out pretty well for them because their children became very Americanized. I would definitely say, yes, they lost a major sense of their Mexican identity in some ways, because they became so Americanized. In fact, all of them, my grandma and all of her siblings, they spoke perfect English. The only accent they had was not Mexican. Their accent was from Buffalo, New York. It was that northern accent that they had. So that was the only accent, but it was perfect English. Okay, well, it was all about creating better opportunity for their kids. That was the concept that my great-grandparents, who were from Mexico, wanted to do. Well, sure enough, it worked out pretty well because their children were Americans. And even a couple of years ago, when my grandma, one of her brothers came to visit from New York, and I saw them talking, and nothing other than the way they looked, nothing about the conversation and the exchange looked Mexican. It looked like two people in their late 70s, early 80s having a conversation, catching up in perfect English. And they just happened to look very Native American to Mexico. Because according to my DNA test, with me being, 21% Central American, they had a higher percentage of that Native American DNA in Mexico and less of the Spanish, arguably. So it's interesting because my grandma ended up marrying another immigrant child, because my grandfather that she married was an Italian American who was one of 11 or 12 kids. And same situation. His parents moved here from Italy. He was raised here with all of his siblings, and they didn't speak Italian. They didn't have an Italian accent. They had a Wisconsin accent, Kenosha, Wisconsin, because that's where they moved from. Came through New York City, went to Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is outside of Chicago. So both of my grandparents, the Italian grandfather and the Mexican grandma, were from the north. The only accent they had was a northern accent. And they met each other and raised a family, which my mom is one of those children. So they lived a very American life. It didn't feel so much like we're immigrants. They were very Americanized. And actually, my mom's coming to visit this weekend, so I need to ask her about that, if she ever felt like she was being raised by two immigrant parents. Well, her parents were born here, but still, you go one more generation, you're going to a different country. So clearly, the concept of not allowing my grandma to speak Spanish really helped her get to where she needed to be. I can say this in all confidence, I believe I wouldn't exist if my grandma, if English wasn't really her first language. I don't think she would have met my grandfather, because the English language thing because they wrote letters while he was in the war. So they're communicating in English. And actually they met because my grandma's brother was also fighting the war. They were training in South Carolina. So a Mexican American and an Italian American were fighting in the war together, training in South Carolina, and one says, hey, I've got a sister, and one says, I'd like to meet your sister. So they write letters. They end up getting married. That's the story of my grandparents. But if the English wasn't so good, I just don't see that they would have met, and I don't think that I would exist. So we can think, ooh, that's an attack on my grandma's Mexican identity that she couldn't speak Spanish. But for me, in hindsight, as a result of all of that, I can see, you know what? It really wasn't that bad of an idea. Now, granted, I wouldn't mind if my grandma did speak Spanish, teach to my mom, and that I could speak Spanish. That'd be great if I were bilingual, no matter what language it would be, right? But that hasn't been my experience. And overall, I actually am in favor of the decision that my great-grandparents made to not allow my grandma to speak Spanish in the home and to only speak language of America. Learn that through immersion. It got her to where she needed to be. It got me here. And actually, it's affected your life, because you wouldn't be 6 minutes into this video about this if her English wasn't so perfectly American. But do you see it a different way? Comment section, tell me what you think about my great-grandparents' decision to not allow my grandma to speak Spanish in her home, therefore forcing her to have perfect English. What do you think about that?